today I'm here with John White, and we are going to be talking about lots of different things. But just before we started, we were talking about how we could maybe talk about ourselves, how we knew it, how we met each other.
Yeah. So I just always think of this as an amazing story. Let's see. So in Luke 10, let me just give you a little context. In Luke 10, the Lord taught us a really important lesson about 20 years ago about how he wants to grow things. And it has to do with a particular verse in Luke chapter 10. So the context is, it says Jesus called 72 others to himself, sent them out 2 by 2 to every town and village where he was going to go. So we got 72 guys. I picture them sitting on maybe a hillside, 72 guys. But it says 72 others. So I think it's 72 plus the 12. So I think we have a total of 84. That's my theory. And he pairs them up. So now we have 42 church planting teams of 2 men each. Sends them out. I think he paired them, by the way. I think he put them together. And just an interesting thing along that line, I was watching the new series, The Chosen. I think it's season 3, episode 2, where he's doing this. He's pairing them up, sending them out. And one of the pairings in the video series is Matthew, the tax collector, with Simon the Zealot, who he calls Zeke. I guess that's like for zealot, right? And I thought, if there were ever 2 people that were more different. So Matthew sort of works for the Roman government. Simon the Zealot wants to overthrow the government, but Jesus puts them together. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, sends them out 2 by 2, 42 church planting teams. That's verse 1. Verse 2, Jesus says, so the fields are white unto harvest, but the laborers are few, which I read that for years before it really struck me. He's got 42 church planting teams, and Jesus says it's not very many. So I'm picturing myself in that situation. Well, how many do you want? What would be enough? You're like, would 100 or 500? What would you like? Who knows? But he wants more. And the question is, how do you get more? And that brings us to the second half of verse 2, where Jesus says, therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send forth workers into the harvest. So we took to calling that the 10-2B prayer, Luke 10, verse 2, part B. And so about 20 years ago, we began praying that prayer. And the amazing thing is that the Lord of the harvest answers that prayer. And so we have this whole series of people that God has sent to us in the most unusual ways. And it's pretty clear that God was doing it. And your mother is one of the great examples of that.
Yep, definitely.
I was sort of just minding my own business, and here this person, this Aussie from Australia, who is in Thailand, working as a missionary in Thailand, contacts me one day and wants to do Church 101. And I'm thinking, is this like 7, 8 years ago? Do you have any idea of how long ago it was?
I think longer than that. I'd be saying close to. Oh, you're probably right. 8 to 10, I would say. Yeah,
somewhere in that ballpark. And I thought, I don't even know anybody in Australia, and she's in Thailand. And what's this all about? But here's your mother, Jen, and she started to do house church. Tells me she has no idea how to do it. Can we help? And so we go through Church 101, and she loves it. It's like she was just ready for this. And so I think of that as being a 10-2B answer. And she immediately began to take the things that she had learned from Church 101 and was implementing them in their little house church there in Lamsak, Thailand.
Yep.
And part of who was there was you.
Yep.
And here is Ben, this son, who, well, how would you describe your spiritual condition at that point?
Yeah, I would describe myself as always wanting to be with God. That was my underneath everything. That's what I wanted. But then, I would describe myself as being angry. So I was like angry about everything. And I still, as I'm learning about enemy mode, I'm realizing I'm not in enemy mode with people. I'm in enemy mode with the world. So it's like always on. And, so that's basically what I was. I was in enemy mode with the world. And yeah, sometimes it was I was in extreme enemy mode, like super angry all the time, and other times it was calm. And, but then, yeah, I wasn't treating people around me who I should be loving the most in a good way. So yeah, it was affecting like everyday life quite a lot. So yeah, that's how I would describe it. Yeah.
So after your mother finishes Church 101, we started a leader team, which is kind of the next step after Church 101. And someplace along the line, again, you might have the date better. She says, "I'd like to invite my son Ben to join leader team." And you came. And what were your first impressions of being a leader team?
Yeah, I was not excited about it because I always felt like I should do things all the time, and then like to be as a Christian, I should be doing this, should be doing that. But and so I wasn't excited about it. But I had a feeling that I should just like this is my should or God's should that I should try it, and I did it, and because I had a lot of bad experiences in church, as a lot of us probably have, and yeah, I came into the group and it was just, everyone was like much older than me. And it was probably one of the best experiences I ever had. And I had the first one and I'm like, oh, I actually want to do another one. So it was like, yeah, everyone was super cool. And since then I've met a lot of the people in that group in real life as well. Or all of them, right? Yeah, we met all of them at the conference in 2019. And it was, yeah, it was a massive life-changing thing for me.
And it was so fun to watch because over the course of weeks and months, you could almost see this transformation in your life. I mean, you're really changing. Your relationship with the Lord is growing and deepening. And then over the years, you have really dived into Luke 10. You have gone through facilitator training. You've now become a trainer. So you're training facilitators. You've facilitated dozens of Church 101 groups, I would say, with people all over the world and are training people. And God is just using you in amazing ways. And I still meet with you and your mom every other week. So we just become good friends. It's so much fun to share life and work through things together. And so I really treasure my relationship with you as well as with your mom.
Yeah, it's been yeah, like I said, the biggest life-changing thing that's ever happened to me being on that leader team. And, yeah, continuously learning about relational living. And it's like, even being able to talk about that sort of thing, I had no idea I had no idea how to do relationships, let alone ask questions, like really simple things I couldn't do. So, this has taught me so much, especially going into, facilitator training and then training as a trainer. And and a little bit of coaching training with you. And, yeah, it changes everything. It changes your perspective on life massively. So you see people not as a enemy or a problem. You see them as a person that you can have a relationship with and yeah, and talk to them. And yeah, it's very awesome. Yeah. So that's cool.
So at some point, I don't know, a year ago, someplace in there, I was thinking, I was watching people doing Instagram and other social media, and, at my advanced age, 75, I just didn't think I was ready to kind of conquer Instagram. I do a podcast and Facebook and things like that. And one of the things I know about you is that you are really good at figuring things out and that you already were doing some social media things. So I came to you and said, would you help me with this? And so you have created an Instagram account, which we call House Church Coach. And so, we talk and then you take the things from that and put it out into various social media, which I really appreciate. So that's really the kind of what this conversation is about, is another time for us to talk about stuff and for you to ask questions and see what we can use to send out to people, kind of help them with what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. It's been really fun. I think that's the key. Like, I figured things out, but I didn't really know how to do any of this stuff before. Like, I've seen it and watched it a little bit, and slowly but surely getting better at it. And it's a lot of fun. I love learning how to do it, and yeah, it's been really good figuring this side of things out as well. So yeah, that's cool. I appreciate it. But maybe because we were talking about this before, you guys, the leaders of Luke 10 are bringing out another book soon, and maybe we could talk about that a little bit first, and then I don't know, I have a few questions, and maybe you have some other things that you want to talk about around this. But yeah, I had a read of it the other day, and you just told me what you might be calling it, but I've already forgotten. But maybe you can tell us. But yeah, maybe, yeah, I don't know, just talk about a little bit about the idea around it first, and then I'll ask some of those questions.
Sure. So, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, myself and Ken Smith and Tony Daniels, we're kind of some of the key leaders in Luke 10, felt like the Lord wanted us to spend some time together listening to him about the core values of Luke 10. And so we spent a week together in Nashville, and it was kind of a, we had all these pieces of paper on the wall, and we'd put things up there. Then we'd go listen to Jesus for a while. We'd come back and share what we heard, and we'd change things, and we'd go listen. We're coming back and forth. And out of that emerged 5 core values for Luke 10. And the more we have lived with that over the years, we felt like this is really what the Lord was saying to us. We think that values are really important to identify. Out of values come practices, the practical things, but it's the values that explain why we do what we do. And so the 5 core values are, it really has to do with a movement. So Jesus, joy fueled, Jesus led, communities, ecosystems of grace. I remember all these: spiritual moms and dads, and communities of practice. There, I got it. And so we felt like the Lord said that we were to write a book about each one of these. So we've written the first book, which is Joy Fueled, and we were in the process of writing the second book, Jesus Led. And in the middle of that, Kent felt like he got some direction from the Lord that before we finish book number 2, we should give people an overview of these 5 core values. And so that kind of, we kind of laughingly say, as we were working on a book about Jesus led us to do something different. And so we have written this sort of a smaller book, but it's to give the overview of these 5 core values. I think the name of it is going to be The Relational Revolution. We've just about finished the manuscript. We're now in, where are we, early to mid-January, and we're about ready to give it to the publisher. So we think it'll be out in probably early to mid-February. And again, sections on, excuse me, each of these 5 core values. What are they? Why are they so important? And why are they radically different from the current church culture? Each one of these contrasts with things that we think people and we have experienced in current church culture, which we think God wants to change. So that's kind of the big picture of the book.
That's super cool. Like, before I get into my other questions, I had one pop up. It's like the idea of, because people in groups that I've been, as I facilitated intro calls and Church 101s, this question has come up quite a few times. But Luke 10 has 5 core values rather than a doctrine. Is it the same thing? And why would you say that you chose values rather than a doctrine?
Yeah, it's not exactly the same thing. It is true. Sometimes people will say, do you have a doctrinal statement or statement of faith? And in a sense, we don't. We've gone at a different way, and that is to talk about values and practices. In the midst of that, there are tons of theology. I mean, you'll read lots of Bible verses and underlying concepts. So people learn theology. They just do it in a different way. When I was in seminary, we took courses, and a whole section of courses on systematic theology, get the doctrine of man, the doctrine of God, of the Holy Spirit, of the church, and so on. But we've chosen to do it differently, that you kind of learn in a more natural kind of way in the context of relationships and in the context of life. So the theology's there, it just does it in a different way.
Yeah, it's not just in your face and say, oh, read this Bible verse and tell us what you think. It's not like that. Yeah, that's true. It's really good. And you have to experience that, don't you? You can't be like, a lot of people look at it from the outside and like, oh, there's no Bible readings in it. It's like, yeah, there is, but you just have to come in and experience it. And then it's like, and you notice it. Yeah, it's great. I like that. So yeah, as I was reading through it, it's at the very beginning of the book. This statement, it says, is a statement to all those who have wounded or been wounded in the name of Christ. That really stuck out to me. And, cause that's been, I have been wounded, and I've probably wounded people as well. Probably people in my family when I was younger with my son, and I just felt, and I don't know, but when you get into those situations, like you get a little bit scared and you're like, oh, I have to tell you the truth. Like you have to learn this and you have to do this. Maybe that's another way of wounding. But, I don't know. What does that mean to you, that statement, to all those who have been wounded or who have wounded or been wounded in the name of Christ?
Yeah, well, great question. It means a lot of different things. There's lots of different kind of abuse that has occurred in the church and in the name of the church sometimes. So, for instance, on the extreme end, I noticed that just in the last few months, there's been a big scandal within the Southern Baptist Church, and they've identified more than 300 pastors and spiritual leaders, Southern Baptist pastors, who were engaged in some sort of sexual abuse of their members. And the central organization within the Southern Baptist for years stonewalled that. So people would come to them with complaints, verifiable kinds of abuse that had occurred. And the central committee just denied all of that. It's now all come to light. And that seems to be true in so many churches, especially mega churches, maybe not exclusively. So there's the sexual abuse, there's emotional abuse. There are more and more examples we see, again, especially in big churches, of senior pastors who are bullies, who are emotionally abusive to their own staff, to members of the church. There was a big church called Mars Hill in Seattle. Mark Driscoll was the pastor of that. And he was a very dynamic, amazing speaker, dynamic leader.
I used to like listening to him years ago.
Yeah. And attracted thousands and thousands of people. But at the core of it, there was this relational, emotional abuse going on. So much so that finally he left or was forced out. And Christianity Today decided to do a podcast series about what went on there. And you can find it. It's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And it is devastating. I mean, they've done a marvelous job. It's probably 10 or 12 podcasts where they go in great detail, interview the people and what was the environment that allowed this kind of abuse to occur and so on. And it's just, in one sense, it's sickening, and yet it's something that's really important to see. Sometimes the abuse is much less dramatic than that. It's simply, if you raise a question or make a statement that the church doesn't agree with, you are attacked or you're criticized. We do a really poor job of listening to each other. So there are many, many examples of this kind of abuse going on. And the topic of church hurt is really a growing topic, and one of the reasons that I think so many people have left traditional church. Yeah.
That's the reason that I left, is because of that. I hated, like, the guilt that is associated with church. That's all I feel when I think about church. Like, now I'm trying to reframe the idea of church. But yeah, that's when I think about church, that's all that comes to mind, is all those bad times and the guilt that is associated with it. But it's talking about that. A documentary the other day came out about Hillsong and about all that stuff. It's really interesting. Like, I already had known about a lot about that stuff, but and it talks about the Hillsong in New York as well. But it's the same story, isn't it? It's the same story.
Over and over again.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So another thing that sort of popped out as I was reading it, it says, if we steward that pain well, we can enter into the second half of life. This involves knowing the rules, but realizing we no longer see them in the same light. Yeah. So for me, the idea of thinking as church without shoulds and shouldn'ts. That's just the way my brain worded it. But that stuck out to me as well. It's like the idea of knowing the rules, but realizing we no longer see them in the same light. That really that made a lot of sense to me when I read that. So is there anything you would like to say about that?
I like this idea of the second half of life. And that certainly is what I'm in. And I think, as you go through life, there are crises that you go through. I got fired from a church. I went through a divorce. There are all kinds of different things that people go through. And, like it says, if it doesn't kill you, it will make you better. And I think we learn from these kind of things. And so in many ways, Luke 10 is, first of all, a community of people in the second half of life. These are elders who've been through lots of things, who've learned lots of things, and who are ready for a different approach. Now, it's certainly a place for first half of life people as well. It's a great environment for people in their 20s and 30s. But when I was a young pastor, just out of seminary, I was pretty legalistic. It was all about rules and, commitment and dedication. And, those were the kind of things that I preached. And I think over the years, I saw that some of the things that I had believed and had taught others didn't lead to the kind of maturity and spiritual growth that I really hoped that they would. And so that's been a journey I've been on to see, a different way of doing these things.
I guess the second half of life could be as you grow older. But for me, I looked at it as after pain. Like if you can get through the pain in a healthy way, then you're in this second half of life. That's how I see myself, as getting through my pain, whatever that, all have different types of pain, like you said. And being able to deal with that in a relational, healthy way with other people who are glad to be with you no matter what. And, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the way I saw it. Sorry. But yeah.
That's the case, to be in a community of people who have some maturity and who can help you work through that. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I really, like, there's all the things that have happened in my life. A lot of them I brought on to myself, and a lot of them just happened. And I can notice the way that I have come through hard things or pain compared to other people who haven't had this, relational community. It's very, very different. It's like, really bad things can be reframed. God can reframe them into something really, really good. But if you don't have that, then it will just continuously be bad for the rest of your life and like keep sucking you into that pit. And, yeah, it's just, I don't know, I love it. It's just, that's the part of the life-changing thing that I see. We've been talking a little bit about how church has, I would call it it's an unrelational place to be. Totally unrelational, because it's about the things you should and shouldn't do. And if you're a good Christian, you then do this and whatever. If we've been a part of any sort of church, we all know what that is, and it's probably different in everyone's context. But can you talk a little bit about the relational movement of God, and what do you consider that to be?
I think the fact that when Jesus prays, he starts out with "Our Father who art in heaven." I mean, that there's more theology in that one sentence than almost any place else. The fact that God is the best father that the universe has ever known. That's incredible. And what's father all about? Anybody who's been a father or a mother knows that you have such a relational heart for your children. You love them, you care about them, you want to be with them, you build bonds with them, you teach them. And so I think that's what we're saying, is that we think that's what Jesus had in mind with church. Sometimes we talk about these small groups, these house churches, as being Trinitarian communities. So what does that mean? Well, Jesus, before he showed up on earth, was part of the best small group in history or in the universe, right? The Trinity, where there was this ongoing mutual respect, mutual honor, mutual love between them. And so in a sense, every church, every house church, every vibrant family of Jesus is to reflect those kind of Trinitarian relationships. So they model on earth what we think is going on in heaven at the moment. So that's the core of what it means to be relational, I think.
Yeah, and it was funny because I find it funny, but or interesting that at the beginning it was designed to be relational, and then it slowly but surely moved away from that, and then now it's coming back. I feel like there's a big movement or big push of people wanting to be relational again, and it's interesting because I thought that. Because I'd never seen anything like this in my life, like the idea of Luke 10 and teaching us to be relational and live in communities, loving each other, glad to be with each other no matter what. I thought we were the only ones doing it. And I'm like, but then since then I've come across a lot of different other groups of people doing exactly the same thing. And that makes me feel really excited because that is God doing that, not just one group of people. And that means it's actually happening. Yeah.
I think we're just one tribe, one group where which is about that, but I think God's doing it all over the place.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm just going off thoughts that as I was reading it that popped out to me, so it may feel like it's a bit choppy, but we're jumping from different topics to another. But this sort of stuck out to me, and it has, even in our conversations, in our leader team specifically, and with my personal change, and that's something I learned from very early on when I was in your leader team, is that we can't, and I remember the conversation that I had with that leader team. I said that the changes that are happening to me are automatic. I'm not making this happen because my whole life I've tried to change. Like like I'm sure we've all experienced that where we try so hard. We don't want to be this. We want to be something else. And you try so hard with all your might to change and it never works. So, I said, it was quite early on in the first year. I said, this is just happening automatically. And I was shocked by it. And you gave another word, Jesus will spontaneously change you. And that's the way I would explain it now. This spontaneous change that comes. But, why do you think that try as we might, we can't change anything that's deep or real within ourselves just by willfully choosing to do that? Do you understand anything about that, or how would you explain that?
Well, I've had the same experience that you've had, Ben, of trying to change so many things. Why is that difficult? I don't know exactly. I'm not smart enough to know all that. I suspect they're just patterns that developed in my life over lots and lots of years that were not necessarily healthy. And it seems like it's only as I am in a relationship with the Lord, as I pay attention to what He's doing in my life, that somehow, one of our phrases is, Jesus does the heavy lifting. And that's true, I think, in ministry in general, but also in our own lives. And so, like you, I've seen so many changes in my life, not because I gritted my teeth and tried hard, but because it was something He was doing. I like this idea that Eugene Peterson talks about. This is a little bit involved, but he talks about grammar. This actually made sense to me. He said in grammar you have the active voice and the passive voice. Active voice is something that I do. Passive voice is something that is done to me. In Greek and some languages, not so much in English, there's something called the middle voice. What is that? What is the middle voice? It means to participate in an action begun by another. And so if the phrase to take counsel, somebody else is giving you counsel, but I take the counsel. That's a great picture of how I think we connect with God. It's something He's doing, but we participate in it. And so it's not either or, it's both and. There's a God part, and there's a part that I play in responding to what He's doing. I wrestled with that whole thing for a long time as a young Christian. What's my part? What am I supposed to do? And then I'm not very good at doing it. But when I find that He's doing something in my life and I join with Him, I participate in it, somehow it changes the whole equation.
Yes, that's a good way of explaining it. I've noticed that with myself as well. Is like, all I have to do is let him do everything and be okay with that. And that changes most of it. But then also checking in with him every single day, checking in probably with somebody else is really helpful. And then everything sort of just falls into place. It spontaneously happens. And I don't know, that's probably what it is. It's the hardest part, is to be okay with that and just let it happen.
Here's another element I'll add to that I didn't know as a young Christian. We always taught God is good all the time. Say that together. God is good all the time. I mean, in one sense, it's true. However, one of the things that I'm fascinated about is in the Bible, especially in the book of Psalms, you have these different kinds of Psalms. You have some, and there's this guy named Walter Brueggemann who wrote a book called The Message of the Psalms. And he says there are three categories, three seasons that we go through. So there's one season called that there are Psalms of orientation. Everything is going pretty well. Bless the Lord, O my soul, let all that is within me bless his holy name. Psalm 103. Great. Psalms of orientation. But then we see the psalmist entering into dark places. And he calls it Psalms of disorientation. Life doesn't make sense. God, where are you? And so you have Psalm 13, how long will you forsake me forever, God? Psalm 22, which Jesus prays on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And it's there. It's in the Bible. And the Psalms are the prayer book of the Bible. And so, but then you go into these dark places, and then in God's timing, you come out of it, and there are Psalms of reorientation. And this was really profound for me, that when I'm in those dark places, maybe I'm depressed or life is really, really difficult, that an act of faith is to give full voice to my anger, even at God. Feeling, here's David saying God has forsaken him. He's basically accusing God of breaking the covenant. Made this covenant with me and you're no place to be found. That's radically different, but it's radically honest and authentic. And I find for me, that's often how change comes. I just seem to have to go through these dark seasons. And in the midst of that, God is doing something. And when he's ready, we come out the other end and something has changed. So that also is a real different kind of way that change occurs for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well with me personally. It was funny because I was having this conversation with my wife yesterday, because we're struggling at the moment to deal with things in life, with new business and stuff like that. And I was just telling her how I was having a go at God and just and I said, have you ever done that to him? Have you ever talked to God like that before? Told him how you actually feel rather than just praying, please God, help me, help us do this stuff. Tell him how you feel. And, yeah. I think that's what exactly. I do that quite often. And today I'm not only feeling way lighter after doing that, talking to God this way, but, there's been some change as well. It's not that maybe, I don't know what that means, but yeah, I noticed that yesterday, exactly what you were talking about. And it's really, really awesome.
And part of the problem is we don't do this as churches, as communities. We've lost that. And so, all of the songs and hymns that we sing are upbeat, positive, praise God. But in the Psalms, there are communal laments where the whole community is calling out to God, where are you? What are you doing? Kind of a thing. And Eugene Peterson says that we have done what he calls a psalmectomy. That is, we have cut Psalms out of the Bible because we ignore them. We never use them. He says the result of that is our spiritual life is flat. It's just sort of on one level. And we never enter into new seasons because we never get to springtime because we never go through winter. And that's been a real profound insight for me.
Yeah. That is, I know that we've talked about churches. I don't want to dump on them too much, but, it's a lot of that, I would say, would come from the understanding that we've been taught that we can't really talk to Jesus anymore. And so I was taught that, I guess, my whole life, because that was something I believed that, and then Luke 10 taught me, or you and the leader team taught me that, yeah, we can listen to Jesus and he tells us things all the time if we just pay attention. And it's that belief that you can't, hear from God or Jesus anymore, then obviously you'll never be able to have that relationship, and it's sort of a blockage, and it's a very fundamental blockage that you can't probably get past for a long time. For some people, it's really hard.
So when we use the word culture, again, we mean values and practices. Practices are what we do, and values are why we do those. And so we've identified these 5 areas. I mentioned them before, but just to go over those again. Well, the first one is joy-fueled, and that's in contrast to what is often true in church. We call it the gospel of knowledge and duty. So church is a place where you're learning more and more and more. Let's do another Bible study, another sermon, read another book. But then we're going to motivate people to action, like you said, by guilt, obligation, shame. Sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it's really overt. I can't tell you how many mission videos I've seen where the basic message is either people are going to hell every minute. What are you going to do about that? You better, don't you feel terrible about that? Or think of all that Jesus has done for you. Aren't you going to do something for him? So it's that kind of thing. So we want to change the whole motivational structure of church. And the alternative to that is being fueled by joy. We call joy like motivational jet fuel. And joy is what my brain experiences when I'm with somebody who is glad to be with me, no matter what. Really, so that's the first area. The second area we call Jesus-led, and we'll make the case, do this in the book, that there is a malevolent virus, spiritual virus that has infected the church pretty much worldwide. And it's really devious because it's really hard to see. It's like you have a disease, but you don't even know you have it, but it's killing you. So the title, the name that we've given to this disease is functional deism. So deism means, okay, yeah, maybe there may be a God, and maybe he wound up the universe, but he's withdrawn. He's a long way away. He's not anywhere close. And so you can't have a personal relationship with it. And most Christians would say, oh, no, I don't believe that. But the way we live is exactly that way. And so it's deism. If you would call somebody a deist, they'd say, no, that's not me. But the way we live, it is. And one of the examples I would give for that, I think all the way back to my seminary experience, Fuller Seminary, the early 70s. I crammed 4 years into 3. Took me a while to get through it. But when I think about that experience, never once did any of my professors ever say, let's take 5 minutes and listen to Jesus and see what he wants to say to us about this. Now, if I'd stood up and accused them of being a deist, they would have been horrified at that. But functionally, they lived as though Jesus was not close at all. That's the way that as a pastor, that's the way that we did church. That's the way I led church. We believed that Jesus was there, but we didn't act that way. So functional deism is the current culture or the current value of church in that area.
Just a bit on that, if I can. It was really interesting. I told you about this, but this is something that I'd never experienced before. But somebody in the YouTube comments said, "What you were talking about listening to Jesus," and he said that it was a evil spirit, and it's like I've never experienced that before, or that just even talking about that you can listen to Jesus is an evil thing. And I'm like, wow, I've never heard in all the churches I've been to, never heard anybody ever say anything like that. But that's like far on the other end, I think. But yeah, I'm in my church. I was always taught that you can't listen to Jesus; it's a thing of the past. but yeah, never heard anyone say it's an evil thing.
Yeah, in my growing up experience, it was we talk to God in prayer. He talks to us in the Bible. So everything is about inductive Bible study, which is a great thing. I'm all for that. But what John Eldredge calls a conversational, an intimate conversational relationship with Jesus, we didn't do that. We didn't practice that. We didn't stop. In Luke 10, one of the ways that we do that so often is simply stopping and asking the question, so Jesus, what do you want me to know about that? We do it as an individual, we do it as a group, and that's really at the heart of what we're about.
Yeah. It's really, I don't know, just the idea of changing culture is, I think it's a big thing, because especially with comments like that I heard, and the way that we've both grown up in our churches. You're a Presbyterian in Presbyterian church as well, so was I. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and that's basically the same idea. And then you have the charismatic churches, like Pentecostal church. That's what we ended up in a bit later, and they're all about the guilt of, that church I was in was all about the guilt of money and stuff like that, and telling you how you can be rich if you give to them and stuff like that. But yeah, it's like there's different cultures in different places. But yeah, and I have a funny story that popped into my head. When I was in Thailand, we went up to this hill tribe, and it was a Catholic nun, and she was running this, I don't know what it was, but it was like she had a church, I think, and then like she said, "Oh, who are you with?" And we said, "Oh, we're not with anybody. We're not with any denomination. We're with nothing." And she just could not understand that in any way. It was so funny just talking to her. Like, she just kept saying the same thing. That can't be true. How does that work? And then I don't know, it's just a funny little story. But, that just popped into my head just then. But yeah, like, it's a massive thing to change your culture. And it can be really hard to deal with, like that, some of the things you've been, like some of the things you've been learning and have done for a really long time, need to be changed, maybe. But yeah.
The third one, the short statement is church as an ecosystem of grace. So ecosystem, we picture that in nature. You know, I kind of picture a nature scene. There's a stream. There are various plants that are there. There are animals. They all kind of interact together to create this whole system. And so our sense is that that's what the church is meant to be. That, Ephesians 4:9, Paul says that Christ, that to everyone, Christ has given grace as he's apportioned it. So every member of the body is gifted. And so it ought to be functioning all together, ought to be all of these parts functioning together. Ephesians 4 also goes on to say that it's the multifaceted wisdom of God demonstrated through the church, that the powers and the principalities are going, wow, look at that. You know, they're just so amazed at that multifaceted wisdom. It's not like it's just Ben or it's just John. It's all of us together. But what church has become is a few highly gifted people. You know, the church service itself is that. It's the preacher who is the really good communicator, and we go for 30 minutes and listen to a sermon, or it's the singer or whatever else. But the best verse in Scripture that I think explains this idea is 1 Corinthians 14:26, which I think is what the early church, how they really operated. It says, when you come together, brothers, when you do church, everyone has a word of instruction, a hymn, a revelation, a tongue, an interpretation. Let all these things be done for the edification of the church. It's the ecosystem where God is most revealed. And so that's something that we want to recapture rather than just the great preacher. Any comments on that?
Yeah, the ecosystem is where you learn everything, I feel. It's just being a part of these groups. And there's groups most of our groups are online. The Luke 10 groups, like, leader teams, Church 101s, we do that online, but then people do it in their own life as well, however they would like to. And I don't know, like, we learn everything, I feel, from my perspective, is just being in these groups with these people who are wanting to be relational. Then that is where everything falls into place. It's just like all these things, like you get to experience the culture, and then it slowly but surely spontaneously changes your life into the way that we would want it to be. And yeah, I feel sorry. I feel like the ecosystem, experience that culture in the groups that you're in, and then at the end having a listen, or at the beginning having a listen to see what Jesus has to say about that. And then it just solidifies everything. And it just makes you feel so connected to each other. and feels like you could, no matter what happens in life, you could deal with it because you have everyone has each other's back, and so you have the ecosystem and then Jesus, and then then you're set.
And people get a taste of that in Church 101 because we have this basic value that everyone has a voice. It's not like there's one person that's smarter than everybody else. And the role of the leader, the facilitator, you've facilitated many groups, is not to dominate the group, but to help the group function as an ecosystem. And it's a whole different way of thinking about what church is. So that's the second cultural value that we were in the process of changing.
Yeah, it's great. It's even training as a facilitator changed a lot because it changes you from wanting to teach things to listening to people, and then I don't know, just responding to that rather than saying, "Oh, this is what you need to know." And that is a big change. For people who are training to facilitate coming out of the old culture, that's really the hardest thing, especially if they're older people. Some people struggle immensely with the idea of not teaching, especially if they're already teachers, and it's really hard.
Yeah, we've had examples of that, of guys that have been pastors for decades and loved Luke 10, thought it was fantastic, but the facilitator training, they just couldn't make that step of learning how not to teach all the time. There's a place for teaching, but to learn how to draw out of others rather than always trying to pour into them. So yeah, this change.
This next sort of quote that is directly after this, it says, it ties in beautifully with that. It says, the people of God today need to be willing to lose the cultural life they know in order to experience the full salvation Jesus offers. And it's like, yeah, we need to be willing. That's the key word, I think, willing to do it, because some people aren't. They like it, like you just said, they like it. It makes sense. Like, oh, this is great. But then you have to be okay with stepping away from it for it to do any work.
Well, I think we're also sort of addicted to the old way of being able to go and be passive spectators in church on Sunday morning, where somebody else, some entertaining speaker is going to do all the work. Some great singer is going to do all the work. There's something really nice about that, to be entertained, but you're never going to really grow in that kind of an environment. And so this flips the whole thing over and says everybody is involved in this process. It's not just those that are highly gifted.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a big part of our groups as well, Luke 10 groups and the small church groups and that I'm a part of. It's like everyone gets to have a say. And I've found people, even in our house church here, that come into that situation and they can't deal with it if they've never experienced it before. It's like they like it, but then they and then they slowly just fall away, or not fall away, but like slowly do their own, another thing. You're not falling away from God if you're not in my group. You can be doing whatever God wants you to do. But, yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, that cultural change that sort of works for some people and other people. I'm sure it'll make sense one day.
We say that we believe in the priesthood of all believers, but we don't function that way. We function as the priesthood of a couple, really gifted. So let's see that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it was just that it reminded me of something that happened to me in the past, many years ago, as I was coming down this path. And one of my friend's wives said to me, "You need to go and listen to some more preaching." And it's like, and even at that stage, I knew that was crazy. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we're on different pages. So yeah, that's one of those things. It was many years ago, but it was funny to me then.
So the fourth cultural change, the fourth value that we want to talk about is we call leaders as spiritual moms and dads. And we think this is the picture that we see in Scripture. If church is family, vibrant families of Jesus, the critical component are going to be mature, godly, spiritual moms and dads. Lots and lots of passages we could talk about. One of the ones I love is 1 Thessalonians 2, where Paul, as a man, says, "We were like a mother among you, nurturing their young child." And then a couple verses later, "We were like a father among you," and fills in some of what he was doing. And so we see that picture of spiritual parents as being the key picture of what leaders in this new culture will look like. It's not the CEO, it's not the strong mega church pastor, but spiritual moms and dads. And we feel like there's a need for, a multitude of these people. And that's really at the core of what Luke 10 is about, is helping to train spiritual moms and dads in that whatever your age is, we can work with people that are younger, but that's really our main thing, is training those folks.
That's really cool. Yeah, like it's been a massive life-changing thing for me, and totally changed everything, and it makes me think about life now. It makes me think about things that are happening, and not just I don't know, just be a passive viewer of life. I'm sort of noticing things that happen and ask questions. That's a massive thing that I've learned, to ask questions. It changed so much for me, just to be able to ask questions. But yeah, no, that's great. Thanks.
Fun to see that change in you.
Yeah.
So the fifth value is what we call a community of practice. And so what does that mean? It means that we are practitioners rather than just theory. And in a community of practice, everybody is both a teacher and a learner. So we're always involved in this, and practice is a key word. So just like whether for a sport or for, playing the piano, whatever else, these basic rhythms, these basic spiritual practices are things that have to be practiced. And so this is a community in which we get an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it too. Just that's sort of like the ecosystem of grace. You get to practice within that ecosystem of grace, and it doesn't matter what happens because everyone's okay with it. I remember when I first started having to go at facilitating, some of them was in the leader team I was in with you. You gave us all an opportunity to have a go. This was before all the training was out there. And then I had another group that I was a part of, and I was given that same opportunity. And it's really hard at first, but if you're in a group of people that are okay with whatever happens, then it's much easier. And yeah, the community of practice is very important as well.
I remember you early on having to think really hard about, what am I supposed to do next? And where's the outline? What am I going to do? And now it's just become such a part of your life that you do it naturally.
Yeah, and I can talk to people about it and explain it, how things work here, and the reason why I believe things, the reason why I do things. I can now explain that to people, whereas before I couldn't. I knew what I believed, but there's no way I could explain it. Yeah, that's great.